About 6 months ago, a buddy of mine and I went on a hunting trip in the Blue Ridge Mountains where North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia come together. Our campsite was in a prime location, only being about 4 miles into the mountains on the South Carolina side of the three-state border. Not too far from civilization in the event of an emergency, but far enough in to be where the deer were. Just perfect. I remember being excited for the trip, since at that point it's been well over 10 years since I've been hunting. My friend, who we'll call John for the sake of privacy, this is not his real name, arrived at my house early that morning to pick me up. I think it was around 3 or 4 a.m. if I'm not mistaken. When he pulled up, I was already waiting on my porch in anticipation of the trip. I grabbed my .30-30 and my rucksack, and away we went. About 45 minutes later, we finally arrived at the trailhead. It was still very dark out, and the air was crisp and foggy due to a light rain the night before. We grabbed our supplies from John's truck and started making our way up the trail. John and I were in the middle of a discussion about our jobs and families, just catching up with each other, when almost immediately things began to get weird. I was the first one to notice just how eerily quiet the woods were around us. Whereas just moments before, they were alive with early birds chirping, frogs croaking, and crickets sawing. But now, everything suddenly went quiet. I turned to John, raised my finger to my mouth, and silently shushed him. He was mid-sentence, but instantly got quiet when he saw the look on my face and then noticed how dead the woods were as well. We were about 3 miles in at this point, and the sun was just barely starting to peek over the horizon, casting a very dim bluish glow through the mist and fog that was rising from the ground and up through the trees. I remember thinking how terrifying the trees looked in the fog at the moment, but also how breathtaking it was at the same time. It was no doubt a majestic and mysterious sight to see. That's when John shook me out of my trance and asked me, "Hey man, do you smell that?" Just then, as I was sniffing the air, John and I both heard something very large and very heavy move around clumsily from somewhere within the fog, about 50 yards or so directly in front of us. Thinking it could possibly be a black bear, which can get to be about 350 pounds and sometimes even bigger around these parts, I slowly uncaged my rifle and racked around into the chamber, just in case it was an angry bear. John followed suit with his rifle, and soon we were both locked and loaded, and ready to fire at whatever this thing was, if it came down to it. With both of our eyes trained on the fog in front of us, and our rifles butted up to our shoulders, we stood there nervously waiting at the ready for something terrible to happen one way or another. That's when a second and third noise from something big and heavy came from the fog, flanking me to my right and John to his left. I looked at John, shaking, and whispered, I think we're surrounded, but I don't know by who or by what." He nodded nervously with wide eyes, saying, "Don't make any sudden moves," to which I responded with a nod of my own. So we stood there for what felt like a million years, but must have only been a couple of minutes, frantically trying to think of a way out of this predicament we were in. As my eyes were nervously darting around the forest looking for any signs of life, they landed on a very faint silhouette of what appeared to be a humanoid figure, rocking side to side slowly and ominously on 2 legs from the looks of things. That's when something came flying out of the fog to my right, narrowly missing my head by mere inches before grazing off of the brim of John's hat, ricocheting into the bushes behind him. Then another object came flying out of the trees from behind John, again missing us both by centimeters, so close that we can feel the breeze from them and hear them whizzing by us at a high velocity. Then another object from in front of us, which flew between us and landed in the dirt. That's when we got a good look at what these objects were. They were rocks, ranging in size from grapes to golf balls, and they were coming at us hard. If one of them had hit us, we would have been hurting pretty bad. I told John as we were laying on our stomachs on the ground and covering our heads that bears don't throw rocks and they don't surround their prey like this. Meanwhile, the assault of incoming rocks continued from all directions. John cocked his head in my direction and nodded in agreement. Then suddenly, as if on cue, the flying rocks stopped and everything fell silent once again. Nothing could be heard but the sound of my rapid heartbeat and John's shaking breath. Just like that, nothing. Then, something unbelievable happened. As the rays of the sun began to intensify in the silver sky above, and a dense fog began to lift, an unnatural and unhuman voice spoke from the tree line in front of us, which was still shrouded in a thick but rapidly rising fog. Therefore, it was still impossible to see who or what the voice belonged to. It said in a slow, monotone fashion, "Leave now with your life, or stay forever in death." The terrifying sentence shook John and I both to our very cores, and though we know it came from in front of us, it seemed like it came from everywhere all around us all at the same time. But it wasn't coming from the things to our side of flanks. It was a single voice that began and ended with the creature in front of us. It spoke through us, and was a very frightening experience indeed. But with that, John and I looked at each other in shock, and silently agreed that it was time to go. So we grabbed our gear and ran the entire 3 miles back to the truck, and then left. I don't know what those things were, but if I never find out, I will not die a disappointed man because of it. Whatever they were, they had mercy on our souls, and for that I am forever grateful. But unfortunately, I will never hunt again.